begin our coverage with CNN senior Washington correspondent Joe Johns, live at the White House.
Good morning, Chris. Likely to be a lot on the agenda today. The White House hoping to get off on the right foot with a meeting of the National Security Council and a new national security advisor, a man who is highly regarded and who didn't have a choice in turning down the job.
He's a man of tremendous talent and tremendous experience.
President Donald Trump unveiling Lieutenant General H.R. Mcmaster as his new national
He is highly
of the first Gulf War, Iraq, and Afghanistan, and a widely respected military strategist.
I'd just like to say what a privilege it is to be able to continue serving our nation.
Known as a creative thinker, Mcmaster is a West Point graduate and holds a Ph.D. in military history. The pick drawing praise from both sides of the political spectrum. Senator John McCain, who's been among President Trump's toughest Republican critics, calling Mcmaster an outstanding choice, a man of genuine intellect, character, and ability. Mcmaster takes the helm of a National Security Council 1 week after Michael Flynn was forced to resign for misleading the vice president about his communications with a Russian ambassador.
I was disappointed to learn that the facts that had been conveyed to me by General Flynn were inaccurate.
President Trump's first choice to replace Flynn, retired Vice Admiral Bob Hart, but he turned down the job site of saying no thanks. What remains to be seen is how Mcmaster will work with Steve Bannon, the president's controversial chief strategist who sits on the National Security Council.
And all of the components of the NSC.
On another note, the president expected just a short while from now to take the short trip over to the brand new Smithsonian African American History Museum. We're told he will be accompanied by, among others, Housing Secretary Ben Carson. Chris?
All right, Joe. Appreciate it. We're going to bring you the visit when it happens. Meantime, the White House is set to unveil its new immigration. New guidelines for law enforcement will be announced today by the Department of Homeland Security. That is already a material difference than the last time. CNN's Laura Jarrett live in Washington with more. At least this time we're seeing that this order is being put through the vetting and coordination that was missing the last time.
That's exactly right, Chris. So we're expecting to see two big pieces. The Department of Homeland Security is set to release formal guidance to federal agencies later this morning, explaining just exactly how to implement the president's executive orders on immigration and border security. We know from earlier drafts of the memos we saw over the weekend that we can expect to see language detailing an expanded process of expedited deportations for undocumented immigrants, much more discretion given to immigration officers who to arrest, and a deputizing, if you will, of local police officers to serve as immigration officers, and tightening of standards for asylum seekers. Now, interestingly, the Trump administration is expected to leave in place, at least for now, we're hearing, President Obama's Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program, otherwise known as DACA. So that program provides some protection to the undocumented who were brought here as children. Now, separately, the White House is putting together finishing touches on that new version of the travel ban. And some are wondering, what are the key differences this second time around? The head of Homeland Security said that the rollout of the new ban will likely include a phase-in period instead of that automatic switchover we saw last time, and that it's safe to assume green card holders will not be affected by the ban. This time, sources also tell us that the White House counsel's office is taking a lead role in drafting to avoid some of the legal problems in the last go-around. So one critical issue, Allison, is going to be what happens to foreign visitors like someone on a student visa.
is a big question, and there are other questions as well. So we will have to wait to see all the details as they play out. Laura, thank you very much for all of that background. So there's lots to discuss. Let's bring in our panel. We have Jackie Kucinich, CNN political analyst and Washington bureau chief of the Daily Beast. We have Matt Lewis, CNN political commentator and senior columnist at the Daily Beast, and Errol Lewis, CNN political commentator and political anchor of Spectrum News. Great to see all of you. So, Matt, let's talk about the new National Security Advisor, Lieutenant General McMaster, who has, it appears, a highly regarded reputation and history. But the big question is, how much autonomy and power and access to the president will he have? And the reason that we wonder about that is because other candidates turned down the job because they felt that somehow they would be eclipsed by, say, Steve Bannon.
Right. So first, I think this is a great pick. This is a guy who, you know, the stereotypes of people who study war would be either they're tough, macho guys who just want to go in and break things and kill people, or sort of intellectuals in ivory towers thinking up theories. And this is a guy who really combines those two things. He's a tough guy, also a smart guy when it comes to things like asymmetric warfare and counterinsurgency. So I think it's a great pick. How does he fit in? How does he gel? What's the chemistry like? You never know until you get a group of people together who will emerge as leader and how it will shake out. I would say this. I'm heartened by the fact that we are sending tough generals into the room to deal with Steve Bannon. I mean, if Steve Bannon can walk all over somebody such as General McMaster and General Kelly, then he is quite the alpha dog if he pulls that off.
Doesn't seem likely.
Errol, it's interesting how in the analysis of the effectiveness of McMaster, we leave out the name of the president in figuring out how it will fit in to the dynamic. What is your take on what McMaster needs to do to be successful in light of what we just saw with Flynn? And by the way, we still don't know why Flynn was forced to resign.
Well, the challenge for McMaster will be to be himself and to put into action some of his very impressive background. I mean, in researching him a little bit, I had not heard his name before. One of the things that comes up is a list that he recommended to some of his subordinates on the history of warfare. And it includes some classics like the Peloponnesian Wars and the Art of War by Sun Tzu. But it also includes things like the memoirs from General Grant. This is somebody who sees himself and frankly wrote a volume that contributes to part of a long line of history. And so he knows that he's stepping into a very fraught situation in which he's got a commander-in-chief. He's still active duty. He has to do what the commander-in-chief instructs him to do. On the other hand, he's got a lot of history. And so rather than continually going back to this political sort of reaction and saying, well, the establishment is always wrong, this is somebody who's part of a much larger establishment, a much broader and honorable and important tradition. If he brings that to the table, I think he'll carry a lot more moral force than any of the political people around the president.
Jackie, it is really fascinating, though, to think about what Matt raised, and that is the dynamic and the chemistry that goes on in the Oval Office. So what do we think about how he comes into that pecking order?
Well, at the end of the day, it matters if Trump listens to his advisors. And we know he listens to Bannon. We know he listened to Flynn. So that will be to get his ear is going to be the biggest challenge. Now, he is a general, and Trump does like to surround himself with generals. He is someone who during the campaign he may have said he doesn't like to listen to them, but it seems like he has listened to them since he's repeated, well, he says it doesn't work, so it doesn't work. So in the way that Mattis can earn his respect and have his ear is going to be the biggest challenge when you do have perhaps competing people like Steve Bannon, who hasn't really shown a willingness to, let's say, disseminate power in the White House.
Well, Bannon's a little bit of an X factor. I mean, most of what we hear is hearsay and anecdotal. He's not talking to the media, and the president wants people to believe he's setting the tone from the top. But what do you see in this contrast between what we assume is Bannon's agenda and what we've seen these big dogs doing on their own, whether it's Pence going out there and saying things about Russia I've never heard the president say in terms of hewing to logical and customary notions of Putin's invasion where he shouldn't be. Mattis, as we just heard, taking on responsibility for what NATO should be. Kelly going over to Palestine and talking about what a two-state solution should be. So what does that tell us about what's going on in the White House?
Right, and I think, look, with Steve Bannon, what always happens is we need to sort of make a boogeyman to a certain degree. That's just natural. Karl Rove was Bush's brain, and so maybe we're attributing more to Steve Bannon than he actually deserves. But I would say this, I think you're right. If you're going to have spokesmen and leaders who go around the country ostensibly speaking on your behalf, then the question is, do they have credibility? As Jackie was saying, in the case of General Mattis, I think it's very clear that he does. When he says, we're not going to torture, we're not going to do waterboarding, Trump then goes, oh, yeah, we're not going to do that anymore, right? General Mattis says we're not going to take their oil. Well, I think that Donald Trump will go along with that. My concern now is Mike Pence. Is he out of the loop? Is he somebody who, when he goes to NATO and says something, I don't know that really represents Donald Trump's, what Donald Trump's going to do, and that's a problem.
Well, if he threw Flynn under the bus because Pence was insulted by what he did or didn't know, that was a pretty high price.
That's he misled his vice president. I mean,
do we even know? I don't even know that we know that.
That's what the president keeps saying. I mean, that's the public explanation that we keep getting.
And it makes no sense because he says, I was fine with the conversations that Flynn was having. I don't think he was misleading. The FBI says he wasn't misleading, and then they fire the guy.
Well, clearly something went wrong because Pence wasn't on the same page.
But if that's true.
But hold on a second, Errol. I want to move on because we're just getting word right now that the State Department has just confirmed that Secretary of State Tillerson and Secretary Kelly will be heading to Mexico tomorrow. That's interesting, obviously, with all that the president has been saying about Mexico. And we're expecting this new revised version of the travel ban to be coming out at some point this week. So there are a lot of pieces in flux right now. What do you think that their message to Mexico will be?
Well, look, I think we see a pattern here in the first 33 days of Donald Trump jumping out with facts that may or may not be correct or accurate. He does it with Australia. He does it with Sweden. He does it to a certain extent with this whole fiasco with the first round of the travel ban. And then his people come behind him to try and clean the whole thing up. So I would interpret is trying to clean up some of the statements and some of the loose talk that went out there that failed. This is